Good morning to all of you and welcome to this webinar. And this is a very special webinar for me because of multiple reasons. One is that ZEE Campbell was my colleague at one point of time. And I think she's an academic. No other academic would have traveled the way in which she would have. I think she had taught in many countries and keeps upgrading her knowledge all the time by enrolling on variety of courses. The best part of her is that I think none of us in this room would have traveled in India as much as she has traveled, and none of us might have the Indian artwork like the way in which she has got, and the way in which she knows about Indian culture. I doubt, like most of us, might know about it. Welcome you, Helen Z. Campbell, for this webinar.
Thank you very much for the very pleasant introduction. I am at this moment in Philadelphia, USA, which is 9.5 hours behind Coimbatore. So it's a little late for me, but that's quite okay. Because I'm about to talk about something that is, I think, quite interesting. It seized my interest many years ago. I worked as an attorney, and I found that in the practice of law, many people did not understand politeness. No surprise. People who had politeness strategies were usually the best. They were the most convincing, they were the best liked, they managed to achieve many things that people without politeness failed to achieve. So what I would like to do today is present some strategies of politeness in the business setting that I hope you might find useful as you go out into the world and take on jobs. And these are strategies that can also be helpful in your personal lives. So without further ado, I will go ahead and put up my PowerPoint. All right, so here's the title, The Politeness Strategies in the Business Setting. And let me, oh my goodness, I am having I would like to go to the next slide, but I'm not sure I'm doing this correctly. Okay, I like to give definitions to things because I am a lawyer. But, what do we mean by polite behavior? Well, there's really two definitions. One of the definitions is number one, behaving in a way that conforms with social correctness. This is called etiquette, sort of a very pleasant French word. But there's another aspect to polite behavior, and this is where you can show understanding of and care for other people's feelings. This is known as empathy. Now, etiquette is more about physical behaviors. Empathy is about something internal. It's about you being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about these two different aspects of politeness. The first one is etiquette. And what are behaviors that demonstrate etiquette? Well, generally, rules. All cultures have rules about proper behavior, things you can do and things you can't do. Perhaps some of you can think of examples within your own culture of things you can do. I grew up in the United States. One of the things that you shouldn't do, okay, is belch in public. That would be an example of very rude behavior, violating etiquette. And here's some of the other rules that in the West we are very familiar with. Acknowledging others. When you're walking down the street and you see someone you know, you are expected to greet them. Another example, introducing people to each other. You're at a party, you're at a gathering. Typically, that's one of the things we're always doing, is we bring strangers together. Using handshakes. This is very common in the West, not so common in India or in Japan. But in the West, that's considered very polite behavior. It's etiquette. Number 4, avoiding gossiping or eavesdropping. Eavesdropping is an interesting word. It means that you listen into conversations that you are not part of. Number 5, this is very important. I lived in Germany for a while. To be punctual. To be punctual means that you show up at times to meetings. You show up on time. Number 6 is an interesting example of etiquette, that you listen and you do not interrupt. Now, I believe this is cultural. In some cultures, it's okay to interrupt. In others, no, you have to wait your turn. Number 7, I like this one, turning off your devices in meetings. Not to be checking Facebook, not to be texting your friends. Number 8, restricting unannounced visits to someone else's office. To just walk in on your boss without sending him or her a text or even knocking on the door first, just walking in. This would be considered a violation of etiquette. Okay, take a look at number 10. Paying the bill if you invited the other party to a meal. Now, in the West, that's very typical. If you invite somebody, you pay for them. Okay, but how polite do we really need to be? Well, it depends. When we're with our friends and family, we can be more flexible, more relaxed. So it's the social setting. What kind of social setting do you find yourself in? If you're in a job interview, or you would probably want to be highly polite. And the other thing is, who are you talking to? That's number 2, formality. If you're talking to your boss, you will probably be a little bit more polite than if you're talking to your coworkers. Number 3, the gender of the addressee. What this means, if you're a man talking to a woman or a woman talking to a man, you will use politeness in a very different way. And last but not least, cultural norms. Cultures tell us how polite we have to be. Okay, so that's etiquette. I'd now like to talk a little bit about empathy, understanding and caring for other people's feelings. This is kind of tricky because typically it's not something that we are taught. It's something we develop over time because we have many, many social interactions. Now, how we use language very often can show that we understand another person's feelings. And one of the best ways that we can indicate our feelings about other people and how we see them is through our body language. Now, this is a huge area of social psychology. There have been many, many studies. But when you really think about it, they say that language or communication, communication is only 50% the words that you use. The other 50% is your body language. Now, for example, when you're talking to someone and they will not make eye contact with you, they will not look at you at all, that sends a message. In the West, when someone doesn't make eye contact, that usually means they are extremely nervous, or that they feel inferior to the person with whom they are speaking, or they have something to hide. But it's always worthwhile for us to think about body language whenever we're in any kind of social setting, whether it's at work or whether it's in a job interview, whatever. Okay, posture, how you stand, how you sit, your appearance, how are you dressed, your hygiene, are you clean, or do you look like you've been rolling around in a mud puddle? All right, hand movements. A lot of people talk with their hands, and again, that's also sort of cultural. But when someone uses a lot of hand movements, that sends a message. Facial expressions. This is very important. When you're talking to your boss, to be frowning, to be looking out the window, to appear bored, this is all in your face. And people see that and they understand it. Another one is, how close do you stand when you're talking to someone? That could be seen as a little bit intimidating or possibly inappropriate, depending on your culture. In some cultures, people stand very close when they speak, and in others, no. They put an arm's length distance between them and with whom they are speaking. So always think about the body language and how it will affect your listeners. Okay, some languages, of course, are more polite than others. Some languages are what we call socially encoded, and that means that the language itself imposes social hierarchy, often through personal pronouns or honorifics. Think about the difference between referring to Mohandas Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma is an honorific. And whenever someone is in a position of power or authority, languages will often allow you to use words to convey respect. Unfortunately, the English language is not like that. You know, I studied German, I studied Russian, I studied Spanish. I did not study Tamil, sorry, it was too hard. But one of the things that I understood from these other languages is that there is a formal way of addressing people and an informal way. This isn't true in English. You use the word you with a friend, and you would also use the word you with your grandmother or with your boss or with the President of the United States. It's the same pronoun. And that can come off a little bit impolite at times. So polite language in English has to be learned independently. Yes, but how? All right, I'm going to give you a short lesson in what we call linguistics. Now, when we speak in English, we use very often figures of speech that we call speech acts. All right. Speech acts are either verbal or they're in writing. And this is where the speaker expects some kind of a response from the listener. Speech acts are often used to get things done. And here's a list of them. I think you all are familiar with these. the command. This is where someone orders you and says, get that report back to me by Friday. That's a command, and that is a speech act. It is a way of using language to get other people to do something you want. Number two, an evaluation. Oh, this can get very terrible. You go in to see your boss, and he or she says, your project was a failure. It was not very good. That's a speech act. The whole aim of that statement is to let you know you did not perform correctly and that you must perform better in the future. We also have refusals. This is a speech act. No, I can't help you with your report. Okay? The next one, agreeing or disagreeing. I don't think that that approach would work. I don't think your idea is a good one. Or I think your idea is wonderful. This is a speech act. Here are some others. Persuading. This is where you try to convince other people to embrace your point of view. Number 6, apologizing. I'm sorry for missing the deadline. What you're looking for here when you apologize is you're hoping that the other party will say, it's okay, don't worry about it. Number 7, promising. When you promise something, I should be able to finish the paperwork by tomorrow. If you say that to your boss, you expect the boss to say to you, fine, just make sure you get it done. Number 8, a warning. If you don't make the deadline, you'll be out of a job. This is a terrible thing to hear from somebody. And the effect that it has on you is that you're going to work very hard to make the deadline in time. Since we have such a large class, we really can't brainstorm with a partner about any other kinds of speech acts, but I'd like you to be thinking about that. The kinds of statements that you hear from other people that expect you to respond in a certain way. Of course, your speech acts can offend other people. And I think this is especially true in a business setting, in a professional setting, because settings are hierarchies. Most of us will have a supervisor or a boss to whom we report. And if the boss or supervisor is displeased with our performance, they may say something that is quite hurtful and makes us feel very bad about ourselves. On the other hand, if you are yourself a boss or a supervisor, you have to be prepared to use speech acts to get your subordinates to do the things they need to do. But it's always a little bit risky because it can create conflict and bad feelings. I really believe that we all need to accept that politeness is a business necessity. If there's a lack of politeness in a workplace, workers become discouraged. They become cynical. They gossip. They become very passive aggressive. So having a workplace where politeness is seen as essential, as part of the grease of the wheels of business, then business can operate much more appropriately and better. Okay, now, oh, sorry, didn't want to do that. Okay. There are 2 general rules of politeness. All right, one of them is that you need to show the listener that you value them, that you respect them in some way. And the other rule is that you have to be careful to avoid appearing too aggressive, too forceful, too direct. Talked about this with professionals on several occasions, and many people say to me, look, if the job has to be done, I can't waste time being really nice about it. Well, it doesn't take a lot of time to be polite. And I think this is what business leaders need to understand, that it's very simple to employ a few strategies that will inspire your subordinates to do the work you want them to do. Okay, for this to work, though, it's very important for all of us to understand the concept of face. Now, face, as we know, means what's sitting here on your body, okay? Your eyes, your nose, your mouth, etc., etc. But face has a somewhat philosophic meaning. And the concept of face actually comes to us from China. A number of, I believe, British linguists had studied in China, probably 100, 150 years ago, and they noticed that the Chinese with whom they dealt often had an interesting way of responding. And it took these British researchers quite a while to untangle what was going on in front of their eyes, but they finally identified the concept of face. In China, what this meant is that all of us want respect. All of us do. We want to be valued. We want people to see our good qualities. If we do a job well, we want people to know we did the job well. This is human nature. And that's what's called positive face, the desire for other people to appreciate your intelligence, your abilities. There's another aspect of face, though, that's also equally important, and this is called negative face. Basically, what it means is that we don't want people telling us, ordering us what to do. Sometimes we're willing to accept it, but when people are too aggressive, we feel that our freedom is in some way inhibited. This is called negative face. So if someone criticizes us, they are threatening our positive face. We want to think that we're good people and that other people know that too. So when someone says, look, you're really incompetent, that's an attack on your positive face. On the other hand, if someone's ordering you to do something, do it now or I'll fire you, that's an attack on our negative face. We are being treated like an object, like a machine that just has to go out and do whatever the boss wants. And generally, we don't like that. All right, now, positive face. Here are some examples of statements usually made by bosses and supervisors that threaten our positive face. These are messages that are telling us we are not good people, or we are not good workers, or we are not intelligent. Think about it, a boss saying to you, your work for the past year has been unsatisfactory. I mean, if someone said that to me, I would feel terrible. I would feel terrible and I would feel angry. I would say, look, wait a minute, I did a good job. I thought I did a good job and you're telling me I didn't. this is an attack on my positive face. How about when a boss says to you, we have nothing further to discuss? Ooh, that's not good. Or how about this one? The boss says, I fail to see how this is an issue of any importance. In other words, you want to go into the boss and talk about some issues you're having with a project, and they basically tell you, this isn't interesting to me. How do you like this one? Someone says, frankly, I think you're a bit of an asshole. Does everyone know what that word means? That's a very, very insulting word. And if someone calls you an asshole, that is a complete attack on your positive face. Here's another example of an attack on positive face, is if someone ignores you. You know, you had a fight with a boss, and he or she walks past you in the hall and looks the other way. That's an attack on your positive face. It's a message that you are not good. So as you can see, these kind of statements, and they happen all the time in business. I didn't make this stuff up. I've heard some of it, and people have told me these kinds of things, and they're very damaging, and they're very impolite, by the way. Okay, we now have negative face. Sometimes our negative face can be violated. This is where someone commands, they request, they give advice, they try to persuade. Basically, these are comments where someone is telling you to do something, to interrupt whatever it is you're doing. You must get up and do as the boss says. So how do you like this? Get me coffee. Or, I want your report now. Or, you'll be working late tonight, whether you like it or not. Ooh, now wait a minute. Tonight, I want to go out to dinner. I want to visit with my friends. Guess not. How about this one? No, you can't have Friday off. Again, these are very, very awful to hear, because someone is basically telling you, you are not free to do what you want to do. You must do what I want you to do. How about this one? Can you help me? Now, what the speaker is asking you to do is to put aside whatever it is you're working on and to help them. So in a sense, it's not a threat, but it is a request, and it is a request that interferes with your freedom. So sometimes when people ask for help, I'm in the middle of something else. I don't want to help them. But often I will say, okay, sure. How about, will you forgive me? You're angry at somebody, and they come up and say, will you forgive me? They are basically asking you to change your behavior and change your attitude so that they can feel better about themselves. And this gets very, very complicated sometimes. Okay, but anyways, it's real important to be aware of face, to be aware that, yes, you want others to see you in a very positive light. And the flip side of that is that you want to see others in a positive light. I think generally human nature is that way. We want to get along. We don't want to create conflict. You know, there are always exceptions to this, but in general, that's the way people are. So it's important to maintain civil communication. And also, when you do criticize someone, whether it's a coworker or a subordinate, you have to think about constructive criticism. I think this is a word it's a phrase we all know, constructive criticism. what does that really mean? What it means is that you tell people what you think, but at the same time you respect them, that you do not violate their positive faith, that you allow them to continue thinking that they're good at what they do. However, it could even be better. I mean, that's what constructive criticism is. And as long as we have constructive criticism, that does serve the interests of business and society. Okay, but let's assume that your face has been attacked. Someone either criticizes you or someone orders you to do something you don't want to do. In these circumstances, it's very important for us to think of how we can preserve our face, how we can keep ourselves from feeling offended. Okay, and here's what I would say. The first rule is you have to be prepared to soften your language. You know, soften, I mean, that's a strange word, but we'll take a look at some examples of softer language so you will better know what it is. Okay, in order to use softer language, you use what are called modal verbs. I know you probably all studied modal verbs whenever you were learning English, and they exist in I think, all languages. But some of these modals include things like must, shall, will, should, could, may, might. These are softening words. So here's examples of statements where you are using modal verbs, and they are very polite. How about this one? Would you follow me, please, sir? Now, basically, you're commanding. You're commanding there. But by using the modal would, it softens it. The message basically is follow me, but would you follow me? You're almost getting the other party to agree. Or how about this one? Would you mind moving your car, please? Or could you kindly spare a minute and look at my report? You're basically saying, look at my report now. But by using the modal, could you? You're asking for permission. I like this one. May I ask your name? That sounds so much more polite than to say to someone, what's your name? Or I like this last one. This sounds very British. Might I have a cup of tea, please? You're asking someone to get up and pour you a glass of tea. Give me tea. But might I have a cup of tea? This sounds so much more polite. Okay, another polite strategy in terms of using language is using what we call the subjunctive mood. And these are, this is a construction that is aimed more at making suggestions as opposed to commands. When you use the subjunctive, the operative word is that. You use a clause that employs the word that. And let me give you some examples. I advise that you come to work on time. Rather than I advise you come to work on time, I advise you that. This is subjunctive. Or I suggest that you manage your time wisely. Or I require that all new employees undergo a 6-month course. So think about the use of that, because it launches the subjunctive mood and it just sounds softer. This one's a little harder to use, changing the verb tense and forms. oh, basically what it is that you will use the past form of a verb, okay, even though you are referring to the present time. This is not an easy one to master, but basically you use it whenever you choose to use verbs like hope, think, want, and wonder. What you will do is you will go into the past tense, even though you're talking about the present. So I thought you might want to rest for a while since you're working so hard. You're really talking about the present, but you're saying, I thought. You're using the past tense, and that softens what is really a command, okay? You're also using a modal verb here. I thought you might. I thought you might want. Okay, here's the second one here is something you hear all the time. I wanted to ask you a question. Again, you're using the past tense, but you're really speaking about the present. You could say, I want to ask you a question, but by going into the past tense, it suddenly sounds polite to English speakers. I wanted to ask you a question. It's especially polite if you go into past progressive tense. I was hoping you knew the answer. As opposed to saying, you don't know the answer? You would say, oh, I was hoping you knew the answer. Or here's another one. I was just wondering if you'd like to discuss this problem. As opposed to saying, I want an answer right now. So think about using past tense with a modal verb. You get a very, very polite construction. Another strategy is to use conditionals, okay? Conditionals are illustrated by using the word if plus a modal verb. So I would appreciate it if you would arrange, or I would be grateful if you signed. Do you see the modal would? I would appreciate, I would be grateful. And then you use the word if, and then you give the command. I would appreciate it if you could get your work in on time. Or the last sentence here, it would be more secure if you change the password more often. Very, very simple. This is a simpler one to use, but it's quite effective. All right, here's one I like. Expressing uncertainty and ambiguity. Among native English speakers, this is quite polite. This is where you don't say something directly, you make a hint, or you are a little bit vague about things. When that's the case, you come off as less direct. And people like that because they don't feel like they're being ordered. I love this first example. It's kind of cold in here, don't you think? Kind of. Kind of. That is, it's vague. What does that mean? But the vagueness suggests politeness. Or how do you like this next one? Could you just turn down the radio a little, as opposed to turn that radio off? Could you turn it down a little? You know, that's kind of vague. Okay. The last one. Why don't you come over to my house for dinner tonight? Anytime around 8 would be perfect. When in fact, the speaker's telling you to be there at 8 o'clock. But anytime around 8, yeah, it's vague. Okay, another strategy is what we call tag questions. This is where you take a statement and you turn it into a question. Because the statement alone sounds a little strong, a little aggressive. But when you turn it into a question, it becomes more polite. So, the first example, you were at the meeting, weren't you? As opposed to saying to someone, where were you? You know. Or how about this one? You didn't go to the meeting yet, did you? As opposed to saying, you know, why didn't you go to the meeting? Or hand me that glass, would you? If someone said to me, hand me that glass, I would think, well, that's a little bit rude. But hand me that glass, would you? Polite. Or you can do that, can't you? As opposed to do what I asked you to do. Or I love this last one. That's false, isn't it? Instead of saying, you're lying. So again, these are these odd little devices that can suddenly turn you into a very polite speaker. Here's another one, euphemisms. Does everybody know what a euphemism is? Well, since I can't hear your response, I'm going to assume that probably you do, but just in case you don't, a euphemism is a word or a phrase that is softer and a little bit more polite than using the appropriate word. Okay, the English language is full of these things, and I assume in all your native languages you have them as well. But here's an example. I'm sorry to hear your father passed away. Passed away is this, it's a euphemism. Instead of saying, I'm sorry to hear your father died. Died sounds harsh, but passed away is gentle. Okay? I like the second one. Will you be having a gathering in his memory? As opposed to saying, will you be having a funeral? Funeral sounds a little harsh. I love this next one. Pardon me, but I need to find the facilities. Facilities is the polite English word for toilet. You wouldn't go up to say to someone, where's the toilet? You would say, please, pardon me, but I need to find the facilities. This last one is good. Are you between jobs at the moment? Between jobs means, that's a euphemism for unemployed. You would not go up to someone and say, are you unemployed at the moment? That sounds very harsh. So euphemisms are your friends. Any that you can think of or you can use often come across as quite civilized. Another way of being polite is using the passive voice. Let's say that you have a subordinate who miscalculated the cost of a new business machine. All right. You could be very direct and criticize them and say, you idiot, you made a big mistake here. Now that's an attack on your subordinate's positive face. You're basically saying you're a fool. But if you say, it seems that an error was made, this is the passive construction. You're not pointing your finger at anybody. I like this one. I sense the meeting did not go as well as planned. Or it appears some work still needs to be done. Instead of saying to someone, get working now. Passive constructions can be very, very polite, although sometimes you can overuse them and it can become a little irritating. But when you're dealing with people that you don't know very well, passive constructions can be helpful. Now, this is very Western, but I think it works in most settings. Call the other party by name. This doesn't mean their first name, because that's very familiar. We call our friends and family members by their first names. But you can use either honorifics or you can use titles. Okay, thanks, Professor. You've been an inspiration. Professor, you wouldn't say thanks, Max. You've been an inspiration. No, you call the person by their title, but that's still calling them by name. It's been an honor working with you, Mr. Chung. You know, it sounds nice. It's acknowledging that the listener is a human being too, just like you. Be tactful. Tactful, again, that means that you don't have to be completely honest. Being a little bit dishonest, as long as it's not violating morality, can be okay. Here I give the example of the female boss asking her female employee, you know, how do I look? And the boss is wearing a terrible outfit. Now, the employee could say, you look terrible. But again, that's an attack on the boss's positive face. So she might say something like, yes, ma'am, but it would look even better if you added a scarf or pearls or maybe high heels. Again, this is polite. Okay, whenever you are in a situation at work, and particularly, for example, in a job interview, it's very important to do what I call observe positive politeness strategies. In other words, and this holds true really not only in a business setting, but in social settings as well. Number one is showing interest. You're talking to someone, you show some interest in what it is they have to say. So in other words, you maintain eye contact, you might nod, you might make a supportive statement. There's all kinds of things that you can do to show interest. You might want to offer a contribution or a benefit. You might seek common ground with the person with whom you're talking. Sometimes exaggerating could be a very nice, very polite tactic. You know, working for your company would be my dream job. I mean, that's a little bit exaggerating, but it might work. Joking sometimes can work, but you have to be very careful because humor is sort of a personal thing. And what you might find funny, others may not. So be a little bit conservative, but sometimes it can work very well. And also you might want to convey that you're cooperating. You know, you might say in a job interview, due to our common background in marketing, I believe we would work well together. Okay, now here are some of the strategies that you would use to avoid a conflict, okay? All right, you would apologize, showing restraint. I think we are getting a little bit out of time, but I'll try to get through this quickly. Admitting your wrongdoing. If you make a mistake at work, I think it's perfectly okay to say, you know, yes, I was responsible. I didn't quite do what I thought I would do. Showing gratitude. This is very important. And showing deference. This is especially important in business because once again, it's a hierarchy. And allowing people who are higher in the hierarchy to know that you see them positioned there is very, very helpful. Okay? Now, I really think this is more of a problem in the West, but it happens. Avoid being too familiar with your coworkers, with your, obviously, your supervisors. These pictures are depicting this kind of physical familiarity that is really inappropriate. You know, if a boss came up behind a female employee and behaved like that, it would be quite terrible. But being too familiar, for example, calling someone by their first name, if you don't really know them. Another example of being too familiar would be asking personal questions. Who did you vote for in the last election? You know, this is not, or how much money do you make? Or even, how old are you? That's kind of familiar. I mean, you might ask friends these questions, maybe, but no, not in the workplace. But always be authentic. In other words, don't be insincere. That's what being authentic is. You know, be yourself, be tactful, be polite, be kind, be compassionate, but don't be insincere. If you're angry with somebody, you don't have to explode at them. You don't have to call them names. But at the same time, I think it's very, very authentic to let them know that you have been hurt by a statement they may have made, and to try to resolve the conflict. That's being authentic. Okay, so if we were a smaller group, if we were a face-to-face group, I would have everybody partner up and talk about experiences they've had with rude or polite coworkers or bosses. But anyways, in your spare time, if you take a look at these questions, it might give you something to think about, because I've had many experiences over the years in business settings where I saw both kinds of behaviors. Extremely polite, tactful, you know, diplomatic, and on the other hand, abrasive, direct, insulting. So think about these things.